Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Indy here with Emptoraudio. I'm also the editor-in-chief of HomeTheaterReview.com. Well, today we're taking a look at the, pretty sure it's pronounced Eytse. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's E-Y-T-S with a backwards E on this thing. It's a regular E, on their website, of course. But pretty sure it's pronounced Eytse. I mean, that would make the most amount of sense there. But this is their P60 audio amplifier. And this thing is, at first glance, it seems pretty run-of-the-mill. Looking at first glance, you look at the specs, you're like, yeah, pretty run-of-the-mill here. But they're really trying to kind of push something a little bit different, kind of give you a little bit extra bang for the buck on this amplifier. That's kind of my takeaway on this. First thing you're going to notice, and I always like to clear this up really quick on a lot of these Class D amplifiers, is they're going to claim, it can do 300 watts by 2. Yeah, it kind of can, but there's some asterisks there. You need, of course, a bigger power supply than the one included in the box. Of course, if you're going to do that, go with a higher quality power supply as well, too. That's usually kind of one of the weak sides of all these amplifiers you get. They're going to be in that sub $300 category. The power supplies are not fantastic. Now again, though, if you try to push 300 watts through this thing, can it do it? Yeah, but you're going to also be running probably a lot of heat, too, so I'd be careful about doing that. I would say run the standard voltage power supply, just get a better quality one. If you ask me what I would do on that, that's what I would do. Now this thing does have Bluetooth, RCA, of course, inputs. That's nothing new, of course. You can do things like upgrading your interconnects is always a great way to get better sound here and there on some of these amps. Bluetooth, of course, is always about the same. If you're just Bluetoothing from your phone, from a tablet, something like that, you, of course, do that. Not really anything to upgrade there exactly, other than, of course, the device itself. Now, this thing does have some bass and treble adjustments. One thing I noticed that was kind of odd on this is the bass adjustment is plus or minus 14 dB, and the treble is plus or minus 6 dB. So you have a lot more bass range you can play with there. I usually don't adjust the bass and treble too much depending on the amp. Whenever I test amps, I go right to 12 o'clock on both. So I want to see these things just kind of at a flat set there and see how they sound. The P60 I think sounded pretty good. I really had no, issues or qualms with how this thing sounded. I made some minor adjustments. I pulled the bass up a hair. My 2 cents on the sound a little bit. I thought the high was a little tingy, a little sharp at the top end, so I lowered my treble adjustment down just a hair, and that kind of softened it, maybe warmed up a little bit. If you want to run, say, like a tube channel in front of this thing as like a preamp, it will kind of warm up that a hair as well too. Kind of give yourself a little bit less sharpness, a little bit less tinginess on the top end there. So that's kind of what I found a little bit to, just make it sound a tad better right out of the box. One thing I always judge really heavily on these amps is the volume control. This thing actually is a really nice quality volume control in here. It doesn't have, it doesn't step up or down too quick. It doesn't sound too crazy or anything to it. It's just an overall pretty nice volume control on here. So I think that was nailed pretty well. You do, of course, get some of the nice soft pads on the bottom. Nothing, out of the ordinary here, but as long as you have them, you're good to go. Now, one of the big selling points on this amp is going to be that kind of top glass window. There's a bit of a blue backlight on there, which it's cool how they did this because it's not too bright of a backlight. It's not too light. It's just there. I do wish there was a way to disable that backlight. It would be nice. I know a lot of people don't like the backlight, or you want to disable it, or even having a different color. I know some brands have offered like an orange or a blue option there, so you can kind of change that if you want. But I would say just have a switch turned off would be the best way to go for that. I know not everyone likes that. I don't really mind it, but again, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, the backlight, I don't like the backlight. Can we turn this off somehow? Some people might even just pop it open and disable it that way too. But just having a switch for that would be a great way to kind of improve that just a tad, small improvements there. On the backside, nothing out of the ordinary here. We got the power supply input. I love these little, I don't know if there's a name for them, but they're the 5-way binding posts. But these are kind of like the mini versions, mini 5-way binding posts, I guess you could say there. So I love these things, of course. I always love to judge the backs on these things. How cramped is all the stuff back here? These are actually pretty nice. Everything is laid out nicely. It makes sense, the layout in the back here. It's not too cramped. Some of these things, if you got A and B speakers, these 5-way binding posts can get pretty cramped pretty quick. That's always a downside there. RCA inputs outputs on the back here are nice spacing on here. They're decent quality. I don't really see any issues on the back here at all. So that's pretty much the overall package of the P60. Listening to this thing, yeah, it's Class D, of course. It's going to be really what you're looking for. I found this amp to be very balanced. I don't like using the word like neutral too often. It doesn't really mean anything to me a lot of times. But I didn't really find anything that was like, this thing doesn't sound that great. I also didn't find like this thing is absolutely amazing, blows me out of the water. But at the price point for this thing, what you're going to find this thing at for around $140. Let me check the current Amazon pricing on this thing right now. $120, and there's a $30 off coupon. So you're getting this thing for under $100, which is honestly not a bad deal. When it comes to these, and again, I don't like to use the word either, chi-fi, but it kind of honestly is. When you get a lot of these chi-fi amps, there are some big jumps in quality. When you go from sub 100, you go from 100 to 200, 200 to 300, you're going to see some pretty large jumps in quality. Now, if you're just using this as like a desktop amplifier, it's going to be a lot harder to discern that quality between those price points. So if you're using this for desktop, I'd say go right for it. If you're using this thing for bookshelf, there might be some better options out there. But for the most part, I think for a lot of bookshelf, very near field listening scenarios, desktop scenarios, this thing's going to do absolutely phenomenal. So, make sure you're keeping yourself within check of, hey, what can this thing actually do? What can it not do? So you're not, getting yourself hyped up too much, having, too much of a expectation for this amplifier there. So there's always that to be on the lookout for. Of course, when you want to listen to this thing and you want to really hear it, so I always like to start at a really low volume, kind of listen to how it sounds. Of course, you can hear any of the little bit of buzzing in there. Mine didn't have any buzzing or anything in there. And again, to upgrading the power supply, that will help out quite a bit in a lot of these amplifiers. Get a nice quality power supply. You, of course, eliminate buzzing. Of course, if you don't have a ground loop, again, if you know how to get rid of a ground loop, you'll be a lot better off too. But I don't have that issue. And so I think this thing sounded pretty good at low volume. When you really crank a lot of these, chi-fi amps and get to higher volume, that's when things kind of start falling apart. And I will say the P60, you could start hearing some of the cracks start to forming as you got to the much louder volumes. That's pretty standard across the board for a lot of these amps. You're going to kind of start hearing a little bit of cracking here and there in the mid-range. The high range gets a lot more tingy. You're going to kind of be more fatigued, of course, when you're listening to that as well too. So be aware of that. A lot of these smaller little Class D amps, I'm not a fan of these things at higher volumes. Just kind of a comfortable, nice volume. We're listening to some nice bookshelf speakers. These things, of course, are going to be sounding absolutely incredible at that point. And honestly, I think they do sound really, really well on a desktop audio situation there. So, there's a lot of things you can look at for small upgrades on these little amplifiers. But are you going to see, monster differences in a lot of these? Not necessarily, but I would say kind of look for what you want in an amplifier. If I get into some more of the subjective stuff on these, like the looks of this, it's definitely a bit more unique with that open window on the top there, a little bit of LEDs there. The side heatsink stuff is kind of cool. I mean, I think it's open. No, it's not open on the sides here, but a little bit of side heatsinks on there. Subjectively, and this is my opinion, of course, I'm not a huge fan of the fronts on these things. I wish they did a little bit more, give me like a silver on the front or something. Give me something, interesting to look at on the front of these amplifiers. That kind of be my 2 cents there, Give me something a little bit more, kind of fun, professional. Stuff like Macintosh, they got that, the VU meters on the front, that green glow. You're not just buying the Macintosh, you're getting that Macintosh quality, but you're also buying that, that really cool vibe of that Macintosh amplifier there. So a lot of these brands, if they had I give any of these brands advice, on Amazon, I would say do something to set yourself apart. Give me something that is cool. I'm not saying do a VU meter, but I'm saying give me something else, that is really neat, really signature of your brand, and that'll kind of allow you to kind of set yourself apart from all these other brands on there and give yourself something really interesting to look at. So someone walks in your office and like, oh my God, what kind of amplifier is that? That thing looks so cool. You want that kind of wow factor. But again, though, having that sound quality is also going to be of the utmost importance as well too. So, but you have that sound quality, You also have that really, really cool, like, whoa, wow factor with those amplifiers that also give you a nice advantage as well too over the sea of other brands out there as well too. But yeah, I would say the Eytse, the P60, I think does a phenomenal job. I would like to see a little more interestingness to this amplifier, give me something else to it. But it does everything right. That's the big key thing here. It gives me my treble, my bass control right on the front there. A lot of amps that don't have that, I have an issue with, because I'm like, man, I wish I could turn the bass up just a hair on this thing. That make it sound amazing. Having that control on there really, really sets these things apart. Really gives you, like a nice bit of, wow, that sounds incredible, and you can and everyone's ears are different too. It's not like, everyone's going to want the exact same sound, especially when you're doing 2-channel listening. You want something a little bit different here and there. Those small adjustments really make all the big difference there. But this thing's got some weight to it, though. It's not like it's super light or super heavy, and nothing wrong with being super heavy. I'm all for it, but it's not super light, of course. The back ports and connections on here are all phenomenal. Excellent spacing on here. I'd say the overall build quality looks great to me. Nothing wrong with the volume knobs or any of the knobs on here. They've all got a nice bit of tightness to them. Good resistance as well too. The little on-off switch. It's not an off switch. It's not an on switch. It's going to be your RCA, Bluetooth, and off switch on there. That's all solid there. Of course, you do have a little light on there to tell you, Bluetooth, RCA. Kind of cool in there. And no remote, of course. I'm not really a big fan of these remotes for these little amplifiers. I think they're kind of silly. Unless you want to use it for, a larger 2-channel system, then cool. But the majority of these, I think, are just mostly for desktop use, I think. I mean, I don't honestly see a lot of the larger tower speakers being used with these little amps anyways. So there's always that option out there. But I'm not a big fan of the remote controls for a lot of these anyways. But yeah, I think the P60 does a good job at what it's trying to achieve. Is there room for improvement? Of course. I think the sound quality is definitely there. Build quality is definitely there. But, there is a sea of these options out there for amplifiers. So, of course, there's plenty of options out there. You can definitely find pretty much what you're going for. 90%, what you want, you can pretty much find now in a lot of these amplifiers. So guys, thanks for watching. Guys, take care. Hope you guys enjoyed the review. You got any questions, leave them in the comments below, and take care, guys.